Please welcome Detective Shiela Geathers.
Good evening. Tonight, News 8 welcomes back retired NYPD Detective Shiela Geathers, 32 years with the department and hundreds of violent investigations behind her. But tonight's case is different. Two men disappeared from the streets of New York City without screams, without witnesses, and without anyone realizing at first that something terrible had already happened to them. Days later, one of those men was discovered in Bushwick with his body forced into the earth beneath a construction site. His face swollen and discolored from decomposition, dirt packed into his mouth and nostrils, and a wooden board shoved into the soil above him with his name handwritten across it like a marker placed by the killer himself. No robbery, no known enemies, no clear motive. Just vanished men and bodies hidden beneath the ground while someone moved silently through the city, collecting people one by one. Detective Geathers, tell the audience what kind of horror this investigation really became.
The first body looked like the ground had rejected him. When we uncovered him in Bushwick, dirt was packed into his nose, his mouth, and underneath his eyelids, because whoever forced him into that shallow trench did not bury him carefully. The body had been shoved downward, violently enough that soil compacted into the face and chest while the victim was still soft from early decomposition. His skin was gray and bloated, fingernails split and packed with dirt. One shoulder partially dislocated from the pressure used to force him into the opening beneath the construction debris. The smell hit before we even fully uncovered the torso. Rot, wet soil, and decomposing flesh trapped together beneath plywood and broken concrete. That was what stayed with me first. Not death, pressure. Because the body had not been laid into the earth. It had been forced there. And above the grave was the board. Cheap wood, handwritten name. Black marker pressed deeply enough into the surface that the grooves actually cut slightly into the grain beneath the ink. That detail mattered because it meant the killer slowed down while writing it. Calm hand. Deliberate pressure. No panic, no rush. That was not disposal. That was presentation. By then, we already had two missing men, connected through almost identical disappearances. Both vanished before sunrise, while walking familiar routes through Queens and Brooklyn. No screaming, no struggle, no robbery. Both simply disappeared into darkness before the city was fully awake. One man worked in a restaurant kitchen in Astoria. The second disappeared 3 days later under nearly identical circumstances. Same hour, same silence, same lack of witnesses. At first, the disappearances did not even feel connected because people vanished quietly in New York every day. That is one of the darkest truths about the city. Some people are not immediately missed because routine hides absence for a little while. Employers assume lateness. Friends assume exhaustion. Families assume people are busy. Hours pass before concern becomes fear. And killers understand that. That was what made this investigation psychologically disturbing from the beginning. Whoever was taking these men understood invisibility. He selected people whose disappearances would not immediately explode into police response. That buys time. Time allows movement. Time allows bodies to travel. Time allows killers to prepare scenes instead of abandoning them impulsively. The first real investigative mistake we made involved shelters and known street connections. We believed initially that the victims knew whoever approached them because one witness described seeing one of the men enter a vehicle willingly. No struggle, no visible fear. That detail pushed us toward familiar social networks immediately. Shelters, temporary housing, street contacts, men who knew one another casually through survival patterns. But something about that explanation kept bothering me. Men connected through unstable street relationships do not disappear this quietly. Arguments happen, rumors spread, someone always talks eventually. But these disappearances left almost nothing behind except silence. That silence became the most frightening part of the case. I started walking the routes myself, during the same hours the men disappeared, because daylight lies about places like that. Streets feel completely different between 4 and 5 in the morning. Businesses are closed, sidewalks empty, sounds sharper. Every vehicle becomes noticeable. Every movement matters more because there is less life around it to hide inside. And walking those routes, I kept feeling the same thing. Presence. Not necessarily somebody visible. Just the feeling that certain areas were being watched quietly from somewhere nearby. That feeling intensified after we found the first body because the construction site in Bushwick was not random. The victim was placed there intentionally, forced beneath the ground where ongoing construction noise and movement would help conceal decomposition longer. The killer understood environment, understood timing, understood how cities overlook things hidden beneath constant activity. That was what made the handwritten board above the grave so psychologically terrifying. He wanted the victim identified. Not immediately, eventually. That changes the meaning of the body entirely. If the goal was concealment alone, the name would never have been written there. The board transformed the scene from hiding into record keeping. The killer was cataloging people, documenting them. That realization changed the investigation immediately, because now we were no longer dealing with a predator simply removing victims from the city. We were dealing with someone preserving evidence of the removals privately for himself. And that meant there were likely more victims already waiting somewhere else underground.
So now the investigation changes from disappearances into something far darker. A killer quietly selecting men before sunrise, removing them without struggle, forcing bodies into the earth, and marking graves like records instead of concealment. Detective, when did you finally realize this was not random violence at all, but a system the killer had already perfected?
I realized it when I stopped focusing on the bodies and started focusing on the timing. Both men vanished during the exact same hour range. Both entered vehicles, voluntarily, or at least without visible resistance. Both disappeared along familiar routes they traveled routinely. That meant whoever approached them knew how to appear safe initially. Familiarity matters in crimes like that, because adults rarely enter vehicles quietly, with strangers before sunrise unless something feels recognizable. That realization pushed the investigation into much darker territory, because it suggested the killer was studying routines first, watching, learning patterns, waiting until repetition made the victims predictable. The witness statements became more disturbing the longer we examined them. One person remembered hearing a vehicle door close sharply near the time of the first disappearance. Another described seeing what might have been a dark van parked partially against the curb. None of it sounded significant alone, but combined together, the details started forming structure. And structure creates fear in homicide investigations because structure means planning. The body in Bushwick reinforced that fear completely. Dirt inside the lungs suggested the victim may still have been breathing weakly when forced downward into the trench. The medical examiner could not conclusively prove live burial, but there was enough soil deep in the airway to make the possibility horrifyingly real. That possibility changed everyone working the case. Because if he was alive while being forced underground, then the killer listened to him suffocate beneath the dirt. And the handwritten board above the grave made that detail even worse. The killer remained calm enough afterward to mark the location carefully with the victim's name, as though the murder itself was only one part of something larger he was building privately. That was the realization that stayed with me most, walking away from that construction site. The body beneath the ground was not the end of the process for the killer. It was documentation. And if there was documentation, then somewhere in the city, there had to be a list containing names of men who had not disappeared yet.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Case Files of Detective Shiela Geathers. We invite you to return and watch the rest of this exciting story when we return later this week with another episode. Have a great evening.